this computer. There. Right, welcome everybody. This is our first monthly meeting of the 2021-2022 season. Our season typically goes from September through May. And we have monthly guest speakers or monthly lectures that happen on the second Wednesday evening of every month. This is our inaugural meeting for this season. And a couple reminders about our programs, etc. You can find more information about our programs on meetup.com if you look for the Prairie State Humanists. We used to be known as the Humanist of West Suburban Chicagoland, but that has a lot of unwieldy syllables in it for some of us who like to keep things short and sweet. I'm not one of those people, by the way. We have a couple of different science programs throughout the month. Every month we have Sidewalk Science, which is a panel of scientists from across the country that talk about some scientific news as well as a deep dive topic explaining something about science or exploring the intersection between science and humanism. We also have Science Sundays, which are lectures about a scientific topic that happen twice a month. We have a book club, and we have our humanist lunch, which is in person as of now. Eventually, we will get back to meeting in person. We don't yet know when that will happen. Our on-premise locations are facilitated by the DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church in Naperville. They have not given the all clear to meet in person yet. And when they do, your board members here for the Prairie State Humanists will consider our next step. We do encourage everybody, I think pretty much everybody already is, but we encourage everyone to get the COVID vaccine, one of the vaccines. All of us or nearly all of us are vaccinated and have been enjoying the benefits of the freedom and the psychological security of being somewhat protected. All right, without further ado, I did want to mention about dues. Last year, we paused our collection of dues, and we indicated that if you were financially able and willing, dispositionally inclined, to please give a commensurate amount to a charity of your choice. This year, I think we're going to go ahead and say, if you're able and willing, we welcome your dues. It helps support our programs and perhaps an expansion of some of our programs into other media like podcasts and support for our YouTube registration fees and whatnot. Our dues are $25 for a person or $40 for a family. And you can reply to any board member with your interest in paying dues, and we can give you an address to send that to. Or, you know, if you want to, you can wait until we meet in person. And then finally, you don't have to pay dues to be able to join our meetings and participate in all our events. Everybody is welcome, and we're all a big, happy, humanistic family. All right. Any other questions or comments before we get started?
Right. I will be putting the address to where to mail dues in the next newsletter.
Thank you, Howard. All right. Without further ado, Howard, are you going, or Russell, who is going to introduce Gail?
No. Russell, if you're ready, otherwise I can do it.
No one mentioned anything to me. Thanks.
Okay, I've got it. I'd like to introduce Gail Jordan. She's a former Southern Baptist who left the faith 10 years ago when her teenagers began asking questions that she couldn't answer. Her research led her and her children into the light of reason and rationality. Years later, she still feels the effects, both positive and negative, of that dramatic shift in perspective and attitude. It is this sympathy and compassion that drives her to reach out to help others navigate the emotional and physical processes involved with leaving one's faith. Gail lives in Oregon and is an estate, I can't even read my own handwriting anymore, is an estate planning attorney. She raises goats, chickens, and is trying her hand at grape growing at her sunny hillside home, affectionately known as Peak Heathen. Once you get wine bottled, Gail, I want to try some. And she does have her own blog, which I'm sure she'll mention. Gail, besides on recovering from religion, serves on the board of directors for the Center for Freethought Equality and the Freethought Equality PAC. I have the privilege of serving on both those boards with her. I'd like to introduce Gail, and I'm interested in hearing what you got to say.
Thank you, Howard, for that lovely introduction. Thank you, Scott, for bringing us all together. And thank you, everyone who's in attendance. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you. As I listened to my bio, I realized it probably needs to be updated. It's been more like about 15 years since my children were teenagers, and they started asking those questions. And in our research, all of us in our own way, according to the children's birth order, made our way out of religion. So it has had a huge impact on my life. What I would like to do tonight, and I hope it's, I'm sort of taking the initiative here. I hope it's okay if we do it this way. We started, as we were gathering in at the beginning of the meeting time, we started talking a little bit about politics. It feels very intrusive into our lives right now. You can't avoid talking about politics. And I want to share a story about my experience running for office in the state of Tennessee. As Howard mentioned, now I live in Oregon, but at the time I ran for office, I was living in Tennessee. And I tell you the story, it's funny and it's a remarkable story, but it also gives us insight into the power of religion, as if we need to know that in our lives. And it's part of what motivates me to continue to do what I do at Recovering from Religion. After we talk a little bit about after I tell about the campaign story, we'll kind of close that out and have a question and answers if anybody has any questions. I probably won't follow the chat. If you'd like to chat among yourselves, that's not offensive to me. It won't distract me at all, but I probably won't follow it. But if you have questions, we'll take those after the campaign talk, and then we'll change subjects and we'll talk about a little bit about the work that Recovering from Religion is doing. So if you'll bear with me, if we have any of those charming technical glitches, sometimes that's operator error, I'm going to share my screen and I'll get started with this story. So, okay, this is going to make sense in a few minutes. Can everybody see the screen? Yep. Sweet, good. As I said, I'm delighted to be with you. I serve as the executive director of Recovering from Religion. I have been part of the local regional conference NanoCon, which was in Tennessee. That stands for Nashville Nuns, N-O-N-E-S convention. I did that for several years. I began the Murfreesboro Freethinkers, and so I've had my fingers in all of the pies around with the secular universe. But today, I specifically want to tell you about my experience running for office in Tennessee. It was in a rural 5-county district just south of Nashville, all the way down to the Alabama line. And I promise it's going to be more interesting than I just made it sound like. I ran for this office in 2016, the year of the big election, and I got the usual 35% that every Democrat gets when they run in Tennessee. But in 2018, the seat became an open seat. And those of you who follow politics understand that that's a little bit different, because it's 2 newcomers to the seat is what that means. I counseled with my family and friends and loved ones about the opportunity to run. And let me take just a brief second and tell you that the Freethought Equality Fund, and I am sure the Prairie State Humanist and Recovering from Religion are all nonprofits. And so my political views belong to me and to me alone in this context. So the first thing I did is I met with my dear friend who was willing to serve as my campaign manager, and my family, and we all agreed that the time and the place was right for me to run again, provided a few things: that we wanted to run our campaign based on transparency, integrity, ethics, dignity. There was just no playing in the mud for us. Tennessee has a Republican supermajority, and it was going to take all of our effort and time to run on the issues that were important in our district: healthcare, education, infrastructure, the usual things. So before I tell you about the campaign, let me tell you a few statistics on the state of Tennessee. If any of you have any connection to Tennessee, I don't say these things to be offensive. I say them because they're the truth. Tennessee has the 10th highest poverty in the country, the 8th shortest lifespan, Tennessee ranks number 42 on the comprehensive ranking of quality of life. Tennessee is 15th from the bottom in education, the 9th lowest in per student spending. It's the 3rd highest prescriber of opioids among all 50 states. And there were more deaths in Tennessee due to the opioid crisis than deaths by automobile accidents in 2017. Now, remember what I said, Republican supermajority for 10 years. Now, I recognize what I'm asking you to do. I know that watching yet another campaign video is not what you signed up for tonight, but it's only 60 seconds, and I promise it will give you a little insight into what we were doing.
I've been a Rutherford County resident most of my adult life. I raised my 4 children on the hard work and fresh air of farm life, and they're all Tennessee public school graduates. I was a stay-at-home mom until my kids began to leave for college, when I returned to my long-held dream of attending law school, and I became a lawyer in 2015. When I'm asked how I would govern, I have a simple 3-question test. Is it rational? Does this legislation solve an identified problem in the state of Tennessee? Is it reasonable? Does this legislation make the very best use of your tax dollars and mine? And is it right? Does this legislation do the most good for the largest number of people with the least negative impact for the fewest number of people? My vision for District 14 provides health care for the working folks who need it while saving our rural hospitals, compensating our teachers with higher wages and tangible benefits while eliminating unnecessary student testing, and addressing our opioid addiction problem by destigmatizing treatment, holding the pharmaceutical industry accountable, and legalizing cannabis. My name is Gail, and I'm asking for your vote on March 13th in the special election for District 14.
Radical, right? That is as mainstream as it gets for a Democratic candidate. However, there's one more teeny tiny piece of information that matters to make this, to help you understand why what happened. I have been an out and loud and proud atheist for over 10 years in my town in Tennessee. And while I didn't run on it, I didn't attempt to hide from it either. And as vanilla and conventional and as related to the issues as our campaign was when this video was released, the Tennessee GOP lost its collective mind. So this fella believes that in his 40 years of politics, I'm among the most dangerous women he may have come across. Now you know the reason for the title. This fella, that's our lieutenant governor. The chairman of the state GOP party issued a statement to the Democratic U.S. Senate candidate and the state Democratic gubernatorial candidate, urging them to disclaim me from the party for my radical beliefs, which fortunately they refused to do. In spite of all this drama from the Tennessee GOP leadership, we began our campaign, and we started off with a blast. Volunteers came streaming into our county offices, offering to knock doors and make phone calls, and donations came in unsolicited. Okay, I can see some of you on the screen. If you have ever been connected with or worked for a political campaign, raise your hand. Almost everybody. Humanists are we just do that. That's just one of the things we do. Those of you who do know that know what this piece of paper is. It's called print media, and it consists of big glossy postcard or larger size mail that goes in the snail mail. These archaic things cost about $1 per voting household, which is really a high number. So one mailing to the 50,000 households that were in my district would cost $50,000. As we began to surge in visibility and word of mouth, the Tennessee Republican Party got busy with these mailers. And credit where credit is due. Kudos to the GOP bro who thought of combining the crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy thing with the pussy hat. Did you catch that? Really edgy move there by the GOP. Notice too the kooky ideas that they credit me with: being pro-choice, supporting health care, supporting education. And yet, flyer after flyer, we continued to gain more supporters, more volunteers, more donations, and the flyers kept coming. Keep in mind that each one of these that appears on the screen, you can do the math in your head, was $50,000 for our opponent. Our entire fundraising goal, this is a state Senate campaign, was $50,000, which we proudly met, but that was our entire campaign. And every one of these is costing the Tennessee GOP $50,000. So I need to say this. On the next 2 slides, I'm not particularly proud of these, but I'm not ashamed enough to take them out of my talk. So I'll take that for what it's worth. I am this shallow and petty. So let me say it this way. If you're going to run for office and you're going to spend the $50,000 to spend 50,000 flyers to 50,000 voting households, do you think you could proofread them first? Just me? And if you do spend the 50,000 to mail the 50,000 flyers to 50,000 voting households, and you misspell the state in which you are running, you are automatically disqualified. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
That's what I'm saying. So in spite of the ugliness and the bigotry, we continued to climb. More voters registered, more volunteers calling and knocking on doors, more momentum for the campaign. Our strategy in this election is what is known as the get out the vote strategy. Remember that this is a special election, which is a compressed cycle. In our case, it was 12 weeks, and we had no time for what's known as a persuasion campaign. We were focusing on our folks, getting them out. We were the only election on the ballot. We sent postcards to every Democratic voter in our district 3 times, 3 different postcards in the course of the 12 weeks at exactly the cost of $0. I can't give this campaign talk without acknowledging the work by thousands and thousands of postcards that were sent, bought, written, handwritten, postage paid through a grassroots efforts known as Postcards to Voters. If you're not familiar with them, Google them, look them up. It was a wonderful thing, and it came at a cost of $0 to our campaign. We were so grateful. So the Republican flyers kept coming, and we kept climbing. And then this happened. Now I got to tell you a little bit about the backstory of this. In December of 2017, I had the honor and privilege of marrying 2 dear friends. In celebrating their day, with their permission, I posted on my personal Facebook page a picture of the joyous event. And because in classic Gayle Jordan snark, my status read, "Doing my part to destroy the fabric of America," because I'm funny. I'm so funny. I'm a lot of fun at parties. So the Tennessee GOP, as you can see, this is the flyer. The outline you see is the flyer. The little iPad image, they lifted this directly off of my Facebook page, turned it into a flyer, sent it to 50,000 households in the districts. Now, what they didn't know and what they neglected to research is these 2 men are both constituents in the district. One of these gentlemen is an Air Force veteran of the Iraqi War, and it won't surprise you, is diagnosed with combat-related PTSD. So on a beautiful March morning in 2018, this honorable soldier walked to his mailbox, pulled out a flyer, and there was a photo of the happiest day of his life being mocked by the Tennessee GOP, sent to thousands of their neighbors. I will share here that Shane and Landon, my friends, pursued legal action against the GOP, and in the interest of their privacy, that's as much as I will say, other than to thank them for their service to our country and for involuntarily sacrificing their privacy to the altar of bigotry in Tennessee. And yet still we climbed. More volunteers, more door knocks, more calls, more flyers, more donations, more endorsements, teachers, union members, senior adults, students, homemakers. The primary had come and gone. I had no opponent, but my Republican opponent did, and the voter turnout was terrible, which is not unusual for a special election. So between the momentum we were making and the wretched primary turnout, my opponent's campaign then made the poor decision to engage in unethical and unconstitutional behavior. I'm not going to make you read this whole thing. It may be too small a print for you to see, but I'll start with the first 5 words. Good afternoon, pastors and friends. This letter was written by my opponent's campaign manager, and it goes on to tell about the upcoming election and talks about me being the baby-eating, goat-sacrificing, Satan-worshiping heathen that I am, with the obligatory paragraph about how much he loved baby Jesus and those credentials, and then it gets to the money shot. There it is. First Amendment much? Say it with me if you know it. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay. If you have been in the secular community for any time whatsoever, you know who this is. It makes me proud to say that when you try to breach the wall of separation between church and state in America, you're going to get national attention, and you're going to get it from both sides. So you see, we get this attention. And the same day that I got retweeted by Dawkins, I got retweeted by this gentleman. Now, the gentleman at the bottom was my opponent. The gentleman at the top, you recognize this person, Franklin Graham. And it didn't stop there. We had a spot on NPR. Our campaign was in USA Today. Then came the day when the entire time-space continuum was disrupted. Okay, remember I told you that my Republican opponent had an opponent in the primary. My opponent ran against the Tea Party candidate, remember them? And my opponent ran a similar dirty, disgusting, hateful, ugly campaign. So dirty that this happened. I was endorsed by the Tennessee Tea Party. For reals, the Tennessee Tea Party endorsed the liberal, atheist, activist woman Democrat. What is even happening right now? We had resisted in the face of all of that bigotry. We rallied against the ugliness, the fearful and hateful rhetoric, the attack on religious liberty, the mocking of an honorable soldier. All of the time and money and passion and effort pushed back against the status quo. We fought and we resisted and we stayed true to our ethics, and not one time did we violate our agreement not to run a moral, clean, issue-based campaign. But the letter to the pastors had found its mark. And if you don't think that the dozens of churches and pastors to whom this letter was sent didn't immediately comply and preach from the pulpit the message of fear and divisiveness and politics, well, I beg your pardon, but you don't know Tennessee and you don't know religion. So let's drill down to what happened here. The demographic of the non-religious is the fastest growing demographic in the country, as it is in Tennessee. That probably comes as no surprise to you. It's young and diverse, present company accepted. Some of us are not as young and diverse as others. However, the church growing demographic is just the opposite. It's older and whiter. So this GOP candidate targeted this group of old white voters and enlisted the pastors to spread his message of the heathens are coming. Excuse me. This group of senior adults, terrified, went out and voted just as he planned, then retreated back to their homes and locked their doors, more angry and more afraid, excuse me, and more isolated than they were before. And their children have no health care. Their grandchildren, I get choked up, but that's not why my voice is shaking. I'm just choked a little bit. Their grandchildren have no broadband in the rural areas. Their neighbors get no relief from opioid via cannabis. And their local hospital is closed because it can't operate without insurance reimbursement. And I'm sure you're familiar with the expression rubbing salt in the wound or adding insult to injury. After he was elected, the Tennessee Senate named my opponent the Senate chaplain because, of course, Tennessee has one of those because of, and you know I'm going to say it, his strong defense of religious freedom. I'm not bitter. This is my not bitter face. But the result of the election is not the end of the story, not even close. It's the beginning. So what do we do with this? Not run? Hide our beliefs? What can we take away from this experience? Here are some that I have identified. Number one, in March of 2018, thousands of Christian Democrats voted for an out and open atheist. This was in Tennessee, where even our Democrats are moderates. And they not only voted for, but they campaigned for, donated to, and visibly supported a non-believer, at times presumably risking friendship and social standing. Takeaway number two, we opened up and added not just locally, not just at the state level, but nationally to a conversation about an atheist running for office. That's an important discussion to be had, and it's the first step toward many others. Number three, how many times as non-believers do we get the question, how can you be moral without religion? We get that question tossed to us all the time. Because the Tennessee GOP elevated my secularism in every newspaper interview and radio interview and public appearance where folks could ask questions, I got to answer over and over and over again what it means to me to be a humanist. My story that I shared repeatedly is that both my life and my campaign are driven by equal parts reason and compassion. What moves me to act is the well-being of my neighbors, their real joy and their real suffering. My goal is to increase the joy and decrease the suffering. Takeaway number 4. One of the great joys of the campaign was meeting fellow non-believers. So many times I was approached by someone who said, I'm not a believer, but I'm not out in my town, or I'm not a believer, but I can't tell my parents. And thank you for representing what we value. At one appearance, I vividly remember a young mother attended with her 2 young daughters. She was raising her girls to be free thinkers and wanted them to shake my hand and take a picture of us together so they could see a non-religious person in a leadership role in the community. And number 5, maybe this is the most important, a trail was blazed. The seal was broken. Never again can it be said that this is the first time an atheist has run for public office in Tennessee. The visual I like to use is the image. I have cattle, or have had cattle in the past. I don't have cattle out here in Oregon, but the image of laying down the grass for those who come behind us. And while they can never again say this is the first time an atheist has run for office and state office in Tennessee, they may say, and hopefully they'll say, never before has an atheist run for the state office in Tennessee and won. So we circle back to the first question. Am I the most dangerous woman in Tennessee? My answer in lawyerly fashion is, it depends. It depends on what you're afraid of. If you're afraid of a woman who will stand before hundreds and call out your bigoted and unconstitutional behavior, if you're afraid of a woman who will speak for those without a voice, for the disenfranchised, the underserved, the neglected, the poor, and the sick, if you're afraid of a woman who will relentlessly stand upon American secular values of truth, justice, equality, fairness, tolerance, education, and religious freedom for all, then the answer to the question of whether I'm the most dangerous woman in Tennessee is, you bet your sweet ass I am. Thank you, guys. I love giving that talk. It's a lot of fun. It wasn't so much fun. I'm going to try to unshare my screen. Let me see if I can bring myself over here. It's going to take me just a second. Stop share. Okay, and then I can see your beautiful faces again. So it was a challenging time, and it didn't really factor into me moving across the country once I had done that. And as I said, I ran in 2016 and 2018. I was ready to put Tennessee behind me. My children had all settled on the West Coast, and so I don't like for people of Tennessee to think that they ran me out of there. I don't want them ever to think that. So, but I have moved on. I have moved on to bluer pastures, shall we say, out here in Oregon. But it was a remarkable experience, one that I am so glad that I was able to participate in. And thank you for indulging me telling the story. I just enjoy sharing it. Anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts?
Yes, this is Ajay. I have a question.
Sure.
So history is written by people who win. Not people who lose.
Yes.
So if someone were to run in the same situation, how can they win it?
How can they what, AJ?
How can they win the election despite all the hurdles?
Sure. I wish I knew the answer to that question. I think I think it comes down to, you try to get creative and you try to think of different ways, and there's a gajillion consultants ready to take your money to tell you how to do exactly that. But I think it comes down to doing more of what we have been doing, registering voters, getting out in the community. I do think it would behoove whoever runs to, you don't want to introduce yourself to your community when you run for office. It would benefit you if you're involved at some level in your community, whether you're on the local school board or whether you are do an adopt a highway trash cleanup, something besides you pop out of the blue and say, now I'm going to lead you all. You want to show some leadership before that. That's not much of a big piece of advice. We already know how to do that. I wish I knew the answer to your question, AJ. I think every district is different. Every candidate is different. And I would suggest, as Howard mentioned earlier, he and I serve on the board for the Center for Freethought Equality, which has the Freethought Equality Fund. We were endorsed by them in our campaign. And it was, they were terribly helpful in spreading the word to the secular universe. In other words, people from all over the US supported my campaign who I didn't know, because I had the endorsement of the Freethought, the Center for Freethought Equality, the Freethought Equality Fund, and they able to put the word out. And that helps. So as a secular person, that helps with finances. It helps with moral support. It helps with those things. But figuring out how to win in your district is a lot of hard work, and a lot of creativity in figuring out how you reach your voters. Mine was a special election. It had a special set of circumstances. Everybody's district is going to be different.
Gail, could you give us some information or talk a little bit about recovery from religion?
I'm happy to. I'm happy to tell you about that. And I don't mind if we mix it up a little bit. If you have a question about the campaign and you want to come back to it, that's fine. That's fine. I serve as the executive director of Recovering from Religion. The easiest way to describe what Recovering from Religion is to tell you what our mission statement is. We provide hope, healing, and support to folks who are struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. That's it. That's the whole mission statement. So everything, every program we have had, every development that we work on comes organically out of that mission statement. We have a 24-hour telephone hotline. The number is 84-I-DOUBT-IT. We have a 24-hour internet chat. Behind the scenes, we have hundreds of trained volunteers who are answering those phone calls and taking those internet chats. One of the things we don't do is we don't seek to deconvert people. That's not our job. That's what religion does, and we don't want to do that. But what we do is we try to provide resources. We try to get the folks that reach out to us to consider their options, to tell us a little bit about their circumstances. We all know the value of talking through and identifying what our issues are. We are not professional therapy. We are peer support. We provide training for our agents to be able to take these telephone calls and to take these internet chats. We have a vast assortment of resources, websites and books and podcasts and different things that sometimes when folks come in and they come from everywhere on the spectrum of belief, we try to provide exactly what it is that they're asking for. If they need resources, we try to get them to identify their own solution to their problems. And sometimes we just commiserate. If they're not able to come out in their work and they're overburdened by religious people at work, we know what that's like. Most of the volunteers at Recovering from Religion have come from some type of religious community. Not all. We have some that have been the fortunate few who were not immersed or indoctrinated in religion. And so different people come with different motivations on why they want to volunteer for Recovering from Religion. We have a podcast. We have a blog. We, next week, 2 weekends from now, we are having what we call the Fall Excursion. It's an in-person, real-time weekend religion recovery retreat. If you've ever done a religious retreat, you kind of have a taste of it, but it's all the good stuff, all the s'mores and all the singing around the campfire and none of the bad stuff, none of the preaching and none of the go off and ask for forgiveness of your sins and all of the components of religion retreats. Recovering from Religion is an entirely volunteer-run organization. We depend upon donations of folks that catch our vision, so to speak, who share our passion for helping folks who are on the journey of questioning and doubting and sometimes leaving their faith. If a client reaches out to us and we're working through their issues, we invite them to come join us in our online community. And in our online community, we have different subdivisions, if you will, of groups that they can be part of. Maybe it's LGBT, maybe it's former military, maybe it's XJW, whatever it is. And in there, they can begin to form friendships. Sometimes these folks are from all over the world, but they can begin to build friendships and relationships with folks. You know, when we come from a certain kind of religion, we have our own language, we have our own set of shared experiences. And so in these little sub-communities, they can begin to develop those relationships and work through some of their lingering issues that they're dealing with. We also have, we developed the program, the Secular Therapy Project. That is professional therapy. That's a database of vetted secular therapists. Can anyone think of why a secular therapist in a community might not want to hang out a sign that says, "Hey, I'm a secular therapist"? Anybody? I don't know if you have the ability to unmute yourselves, but in some southern areas and in some religious areas, if a therapist were to hang out a sign that said that, they would lose half of their clientele, because religious people, they are going to, even if they're going to a secular therapist, they would not be appreciative of the secular therapist saying, "Hey, I'm secular, I don't bring religion into this." But it's important that we as secular people, when we do seek out therapy, find ourselves with a secular therapist. Sometimes you can work hard, you can read the reviews, you can look around that office, you don't see any crosses hanging on the wall, you don't see any Bible verses, but you get in the room and you're in 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 sessions deep, and you hear that you have a spiritual problem, or you hear that you need to pray about this, or you hear that you need to find a good church community. And the Secular Therapy Project takes applicants, therapist applicants, and we professionally vet them. This is not me doing that. I'm not a therapist. I don't know what to look for, but our staff vets these therapists to ensure they provide only evidence-based therapy and that they are truly secular. Then when a client reaches out to them, lets them know their area, lets them know what their needs are, then the therapist can respond and they can begin to establish a relationship. So the Secular Therapy Project is our professional therapist portion of recovering from religion. Thoughts, questions up to this point?
I have a question.
Gail, we did have a question typed earlier. Can you give us some examples of the types of questions that got you out of religion?
It got me out of religion. I certainly can. And we'll catch everybody's questions. I promise I'll stay as long as you all have questions. So my children, I have 4 children. I had 4 children in 3 years. I threw doubles the last time. So my children were literally all teenagers at the same time. And when they came to me as young teenagers, and I expected this, I had them in church every time the doors were open. They did every Bible drill. They did every youth retreat. They did every choir. They did all of the things that are components of a highly religious life. When they came to me as teenagers with the questions about the conflict with science that's in the Bible, about the morality, Mom bashing the infants' heads on the rocks and taking the young women as your bounty, and God destroying every person in the planet. But he did it in a torturous way, not in an instant way. He could have snapped his finger and everyone except for Noah and his family would have just vanished. But no, it had to be painful. It had to be terrifying. They had these questions, and I told these children, good questions. Let's see if we can find an answer. And we started with what I call inside the bubble. We started with our Sunday school teachers, our church staff, our youth pastor. And I'll tell you, most of you know this, religion has answers to these. They're not satisfying, but they are answers. They are some kind of a response to this. God's ways are higher than our ways. There's some things we're just not going to understand. You know the drill. When these children, and I had taught these children to be relentless in their pursuit for truth. If we found a new insect we didn't recognize, we would go to the library. This is pre-internet days. We would go to the library and we would find out what this is, because education and knowledge meant everything. And so when they got these answers that were so unsatisfactory, they kept digging. They were starting high school. They were beginning to be exposed. We went to a little rural junior high and elementary school, the children did. And when they went to high school, they were a little more cosmopolitan. They were exposed to a few more different people. We started reading history and anthropology and science, and we started getting better answers. And one by one, the children, I say we gradually lost confidence in our beliefs. Some of the children were more aggressive about it. We had our oldest teenage son was, "Fuck all this. I am not gonna." Sorry if YouTube doesn't allow that. He had a strong reaction. Some of the others were more thoughtful and slower. I was the tail end. I was so much more vested than the children. They were 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. I was a grown up and I had vested everything in religion. It was my entire community. It was my entire social circle. I knew that even my marriage would be at risk if I turned away from religion. And so I hung on till the bitter end. I probably hung on about a year too long. It was a dark time for me, trying to make it work. The children were leaving. This was, of course, over the course of a couple of years, and the children were leaving me to launch their lives. And as they were going, and I was in a hot mess because I didn't know another non-believer except for my own children. I hadn't ever met what I knew was an atheist. Of course I had, I just didn't know I had. I didn't know anything about how to live a secular life. All I knew was I didn't buy this. I didn't buy it anymore. And so when I finally, at the end of that dark year, when I finally came to terms with myself and decided that anything was better than living that way, living a lie and being angry and so frustrated all the time, I was right. My marriage didn't survive it. My former husband is married to a lovely religious lady, and I still care deeply for him, but it was not something, he couldn't bear it. He couldn't live with it. I lost my entire community. I didn't have a friend left. I had some this was again early internet, and I knew some people on the internet, and I went in 2011, if I'm remembering the year correctly, to the American Atheist Convention in Des Moines by myself. I just needed to be in contact with other people who believed this. I didn't even know what the room was going to feel like or look like. So that was a long roundabout answer to the question about what got me out of religion, but it was, I credit the children with it. They are beautiful free thinkers now, and they're living their own lives, and they don't mind me sharing their story. I have a lot of, there are moments when I have a lot of regret for having exposed them to it, but they're gracious and kind, and they tell me how important it is to them to have been exposed to that because of what's going on in our country right now, and to understand the pull of what religion does and what indoctrination does in the mind and those kinds of things. So that was a long rambling answer to that question. Other questions?
Could I interject?
Sure.
So just after you had that long rambling answer, it sort of reminded me a little bit of stories of gays and lesbians and coming out. And it's a similar path, it seemed. But anyway, that was aside from the question that I originally had. What kind of, do you find that the people that come to you are coming out of disasters or illnesses like COVID deaths or hurricanes and things like that, that are persuading them that God isn't looking out for them like they thought?
That's thoughtful, Mark. Yes, we have that happen. I'll tell you that sometimes when I give this talk, I like to say, could you guess on what is the number one driving reason that people reach out to us on the chat line or on the helpline? And I'm going to guess for you. Fear of hell is a good guess. That's a good guess. That's not the number one reason, but that's a good guess. We know psychologically that the fear of hell, is particularly introduced to us as children, has a way of getting into our brain. And at times it will, even when we have rationally done the hard emotional and intellectual work of discarding those beliefs, we'll have this primal fear of, what if I'm wrong? I don't want to burn in hell, that kind of thing. And that's a reason that people reach out to us. But that's not the number one reason. The number one reason is fractured relationships. Almost everyone who experiences this has some version of these fractured relationships, whether it's friendships, whether it's a social network, a support group of a church community, whether it's a beloved family member, a child, a parent, a sibling. Almost everyone has some version of this. Some religions more extreme. We have a very active XJW community at RFR. Those are very difficult situations for folks because of the concept of disfellowshipping, which simply means this person, cutting this person out of your life, even to the point of family members. Some sects of Mormonism has the same kind of thing. Some evangelical Christianity has some of those things, but fractured relationships are why people come to us. And in a time of COVID, when we have been so isolated, especially folks who were sort of on the beginning of their journey, when they were just beginning to rebuild their social network and their support, have found that they have, I hope, temporarily gone back to what's familiar and what's comforting, because they haven't been able to relaunch yet. They haven't found the people in their community who are like-minded. And so we do have a lot of that kind of thing at Recovering from Religion. But the spectrum, we get the spectrum of reasons that people come to us. In fact, not long ago, we had a person, they identified as an atheist. They said that they had been an atheist for a number of years, and they had recently had a death, and it made them revert. They were so seeking the comfort that religion brings us at a death, which are those things, if you've come from a religious background, that there's a reason, there's a purpose for your life, there's a purpose for your death, and there's a big old party afterwards. And this person so struggled with the death of this loved one that they wanted it so badly that they spent a little bit of time regressing, so to speak, grasping back at those beliefs because they wanted some kind of comfort. So I would say that we have everybody on whatever spectrum of belief come to us and motivate them to reach out to get a little bit of help and support. Good question.
I have a statement and a question.
Uh-huh.
Well, first of all, I want to say that as a middle-aged lesbian, it is much harder to come out as a humanist than as gay.
I hear you, Tracy.
It really is. But I was raised in an agnostic family. And then when we moved next door to a very religious family. And my folks thought, it'd be a good idea to get some kind of moral guidance. So they packed me and my sister off to Sunday school.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. I left, my sister stayed. It's a very fundamentalist kind of church. The women can't wear makeup, can't wear bands, can't wear jewelry, can hold only a very few select jobs outside the home. And it's like, I know my sister was raised in the same house I was. How do I reach her?
Oh gosh, Tracy, just like answering the question about winning campaigns, I wish I had a better answer for that. I think that if you've got any lines of communication open with her, I would foster that. I would, even if it's birthday cards, if it's anything.
Oh, we have open communication.
Good. So I would do that. I would be receptive at all times, because there are things that trigger us to question and doubt that we don't anticipate. They happen to us, and all of a sudden, like my children asking me questions that I couldn't answer, there are all kinds of opportunities. And maybe this sister will have one of those kind of epiphanies, or one of those moments where she turns to you. Otherwise, I would say, Tracy, you be the best version of you that you can be, and you do your thing and you live your life. And I wouldn't preach. I wouldn't try to deconvert. I wouldn't do any of those things. I think that we have an aversion to that. We have an aversion to it when religion does it, and we have an aversion to it when someone else tries to tell us what to believe. Good on us. We should. And I'm sorry to hear about the fracture. And I would encourage you to just stay as open to her and as loving as you are to her, and to build the relationship as much as you can with her. But I'm sorry that you're having to deal with that.
Yeah, well, her own son left the church, but her daughter stayed in. I think it's easier for the men to leave than it is the women, because they really do treat the women so, they subvert them so much.
You're right.
Yeah. But, so we do have open communication, but the biggest rift was during the time when our mother was dying.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And she's organizing all these prayer groups, and she's all worried and anxious and not sleeping and stuff. And I had accepted the situation, and I was sleeping fine.
Right. I think we don't realize what how harmful it is for religion to have this myth of the afterlife, because if we were never presented with the myth in the first place, and we had to face death like our ancestors have for millennia, it's sad, but it is part of life. Every single one of us in the Zoom room dies. As an estate planner, I talk a lot about death. Every one of us dies. If we can accept that it's part of life, and we can grieve in a proper way, and we can say our goodbyes, and we can say our things that we need to say to one another before then, because this is it. This is our chance. I would think it wouldn't I think when religion comes along with its golden streets and whatever the mansions are in the whole, I think it subverts our natural process to grieve and to do things on this earth. And I think it makes it harder. So, your sister may be, without knowing more detail. And of course, I'm not a therapist. And so I can't give much information other than my experience in recovering from religion is if you can possibly sustain as much of a relationship as you can without pushing, without trying, people will unwind their beliefs at their pace or they won't. And our
Yeah.
pushing, I think when we live our lives, I mean, this sounds like something that we learned on the religious side, but we live our lives with the joy and the light and the air and the space of humanism. And we care for one another and we model that care for one another by how we vote and how we work in our community and how we feel compassion for those who are suffering. And we live our lives that way. I will say, I would dare say that will have as much influence on her as anything you could possibly say is how you live your life.
Right. Well, at the very end, my mother, who was agnostic her whole life, she had her doubts at the end and she had her fears. And she decided right before she passed that she wanted to be baptized, which I did not object to. If it gave her comfort, that was fine with me. That's her choice. But yeah, my sister was really upset that I wouldn't attend.
Okay, Gail, a couple of people have asked me in private to ask you, could you talk about what a typical phone call into RFR is like, and how are the people who handle these calls, how are they trained?
Oh, that's a great question as well. So keep in mind that these are not therapists. This is peer support. We are doctors, lawyers, engineers, school teachers, nurses, and we come in motivated to try to help someone find the resources that they need when they're questioning. We don't have any objective to try to get them talked out of their beliefs. We want to try to provide some resources. We want to try to get them to identify what they see as going on. We want them to identify what they see as options. We sometimes will talk them through a scenario. What if you did this? What if you told your mother about this? What if, to get them to be prepared for what options they might have. The training is when we bring them in, of course, we vet our volunteers to ensure that they understand what we do, that we don't practice the debate model. We want them to thoughtfully consider what they believe, why they believe it. We do partner a little bit with Anthony Magnabosco. He's one of our volunteers with street epistemology. If you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to kind of learn what that is. It's kind of a Socratic method for talking through, why we believe what we believe. And so we try to talk people through that. We do provide training. It's a little bit of video training. There is some reading to do. There's continuing education that we provide for our volunteers. We never put a volunteer into a situation that they're not ready for. A typical call or a typical chat, and because I'm on my big monitor here and I have my RFR chat open over here. And so I don't want to read it to you directly because one of the things that we do, we're fiercely protective of our clients. Obviously, we need to be protective of their identity, but we also revere their experiences and we want to show deep respect for that. So while I won't read it to you verbatim for what it is, folks come in, sometimes it's not, they don't even know that it's, that there's a religious issue that's backing this up. A lot of folks come in with questions about sexuality. We're in a weird place in this country because we're making such progress, and then everything kind of got stunted in the last few years politically. And so we have a lot of young people who come to us with questions about their sexuality, with judgments about things, and they don't know why. I don't like gay people. You don't like gay people. What do you mean by that? Now, sometimes we get trolls, and our agents are trained to recognize trolls and just try to, end that conversation as quickly as possible. But we give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and we'll go for as long as we can trying to deal with this in a straight manner. And so if we have someone come in to ask a question that they don't know is directly related to religion, it's just a question they have found us somewhere in our social media or somewhere, and they ask a question, we will play it straight and ask them to tell us a little bit more about that. And why do you feel that way? And why do you think you feel that way? And what made you recognize that, or whatever it is. I told you that the number one reason is the fractured relationships. The second highest number of calls are motivated by a lingering irrational fear of hell. But then there are, lately we get a lot of political kind of bent sort of questions, because people are trying to figure this out. The COVID misinformation, that's why would you talk to recovering from religion about that? And yet it's a chat line. We have agents willing to talk to you about it. So sometimes people will reach out and ask that question. How do I know what's a good source of science information? Great question. That's a great question. Let's talk about what are you using now for your sources for news, or what are you using for trying to determine what's good information and what's bad information? So it's peripherally around the religious issue, not always directly around it. So when our number goes out there with recovering from religion, the calls and the chats, and as I said, it's a telephone line and it's an internet chat, come from all directions. And we try to respond as best we can whenever we have those calls come in.
Gail, there's a interesting factoid that has stuck with me for years, and that is kind of on the other side of the argument. The number one reason people give for believing in the supernatural, as I recall, it's the wonder and apparent design in the universe that people perceive. And it's one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, or probably even the primary reason, but it is a reason that science education and the pursuit of science literacy is so important to me and several others in this chapter, and I think humanists in general. My question to you is, in the FFRF, or the Recovering from Religion work that you do you get many questions that reflect that position on religion? Like, I just don't know how I can explain the world without God. How often does that happen?
Oh my goodness, that's a recurring theme. That one, and the wonder of the universe, and the one that I call how can you be moral without religion? Those are really, really common, and valid. I get that. I can see both of those things. I've looked in the face of a newborn. I've looked at a beautiful tree. I've looked at a pansy. I've looked at all those things, and I do see the awe and wonder of it. And I think somebody smarter than me, or somebody in a different field than I am, could tell us the evolutionary history behind why we are drawn to that, drawn to wanting to understand it, drawn to thinking that it's the puddle theory. Here I sit, and this shape is made perfectly just for me. Look at this. This is just so wonderful. I think that there's something about our humanity that makes us wonder those things. There's something about that drives people. I think we have a need to understand our universe. And before we had the tools that we have with science now to explain that to us, an exploding volcano would have been an angry God. Okay, I get it. And we're lagging. We have a lag in our understanding. And I tell the story, when I was a believer, I took my children, we took the children on a Western vacation, and we went to Moab, Utah. And if you've been to Moab, you know what I'm going to talk about. This Arches National Park, beautiful, beautiful place. And I remember looking at it as a believer, just being struck by, if I was the only person in the world, God would still have made this for me. And what a wonderful gift that God gave, that He's created this beautiful thing for me to look at. And it was a profound moment. It was, a profound moment for me as a believer. I went then as a non-believer. And as I sat and looked at the same scenery, the delicate arch, or whichever one it was that I was looking at, that it was having this moment. And the idea of this millennia of wind and water and sun and rain and all of the things that contributed to it would have created this. And then it was so much more profound for me than bring the magic wand that God would have just sprung it into life. And so I understand why people want to ask the question. I do. I understand it. And our agents try to impart that we get it. We have this affinity for trying to seek order in the universe. And we have this need to feel loved and to feel like there's a plan for our lives, and that we have this big cosmic piece of it. And this is why we're here. And it's hard for us to get over the fact that the universe doesn't give a shit about us. I mean, we're here because of a series of events that have brought us here, and the meaning in our lives is directly related to what we get, the meaning that we give our lives. And so that's a big leap for some people. And we try to remember, and I think we do a disservice to our believing brothers and sisters when we forget this. If you have been indoctrinated in religion and you have had a reverence for God, there is initially, at least, a loss that accompanies leaving religion. You lose this eternal parent that loves you so much, his son died for you, blah, blah, blah. But what we have to recognize, that we can't minimize or diminish that by our believing brothers and sisters when that starts to crumble. There is a grieving process. Now, those of us on this side of it know how much better it is, how much more light and air and space there is on this side, and how while it's messy and it's temporary and all the things that it is, it's so much more satisfying and so much more profound to be on this side of it, for me anyway, this side of the equation. And so our agents are trained to help our folks be patient with the clients that reach out to us, and not to push them to a conclusion. We are just trying to help provide resources and the critical thinking skills that they can employ to get them to a point where they can draw a conclusion.
Gail,
Gail,
I've got an election question.
Yes.
Can I go?
Sure.
An election question for you. Just thinking about this for the secular. Of course, we want to get secular people elected, and better than any of us here with anything about trying to use more positive words, sort of staying away from the word atheist, which has such a negative connotation. Do you think if secular are running for election, they just call themselves a humanist, and then maybe follow it up? Oh, I believe in the golden rule, and of course being progressive too. Those really positive terms would really help to deflate the religious right.
Sure, maybe, sort of, kind of, Jim. I wish it were more true than it is. We with my campaign decided that. Now I already had identified as an atheist, so I couldn't, unring that particular bell. But
Sure,
I thought publicly in the campaign, I'll use those words. I'll use the word secular. I'll use the word humanist, those kinds of things. So in my case, the cat was already out of the proverbial bag, and so I couldn't reel it back in. Maybe, especially if you haven't self-identified as an atheist, or if you use a softer word for yourself and you haven't publicly been part of atheist groups or whatever. I think that even in the 10 years, 15 years that I have been out, I think that so many more people now are exposed to the word atheist. I don't think it has the impact it used to. It was just the end of the world, atheist. Now when I came out as an atheist, I just didn't, and I was in the South, and I was religious, and I was isolated, and I didn't know another atheist. Now, most people know somebody who's an atheist between the internet and television and social media and all the exposure. Most people they've softened to the word a little bit, or maybe not even softened, but they've just been exposed to the word a little bit more. But I hear your point. I would like to think that, but they're going to, because we're so fractured in this country, they're going to call you those names anyway. If you're not devoted to baby Jesus, I mean, if you're not all in, if you're not on this team, then you're obviously on the other team. And even if you came in calling yourself, even if you didn't self-identify as an atheist, you just said, I'm not a religious person. I believe in secular values. You use the softest language possible. They will call you an atheist. It's just the nature of the way politics are. So I don't know how. I don't know. it's probably not as effective as we would want it to be, because if it were, more of us would do it that way. Just use the word, okay, well, I'm non-religious.
Thank you for those thoughts. That's
Sure.
very helpful, very insightful.
Thanks, Jim.
Be honest with you, a lot of people are using the phrase non-theist these days, and it doesn't seem to have as much emotional impact as atheist does. But I was going to ask you, Gail, if, excuse me one moment.
Uh-huh.
I hate sneezing on Zoom.
No worries.
How
Lost your turn.
often are you confronted by people with Pascal's wager who feel that it's brand new, you've never heard it before, and they've got you in a corner because of the question?
So good question. I find that more in my personal life than I do in my life at RFR. Very seldom every now and then we call them trolls. Every now and then someone wants to debate us, and I get it. We're called Recovering from Religion. It's a 24-hour chat. Of course, they've got a person, and so what the internet is, what it is these days, and they'll type that in and they'll think. And we, first of all, we don't engage in the debate. So if someone were to say, what if you're wrong, because they think that's so profound, because they just do, we don't argue back. We just say, is there anything you'd like to talk to about related to your recovery from religion, or do you have any doubts or questions that you'd like to express, blah, 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 something. And we won't engage in the debate thing. I get more of that because I'm an out atheist. I get more of that on a personal level. People just, I don't know why they think that they're the first ones who have ever said that, but they think it's they've got you. Yes, as you said, they've got you in a corner. They've got you. What if you are wrong? And I turn it around on them and I say, no, what if you are wrong? If you have spent your entire life pushing against LGBT and women's rights and all of these things because the Bible has told you that, what if you're wrong? What if you've done this damage in your lifetime and you're wrong about this? How does that make you feel? So I try to do a little dipsy-do turnaround, but I don't know how effective it is.
Yeah, I got a comment. It seems like not religion, but it's all things. There's 3 or 4 processes you need to go through. I mean, you start with like a transition where you start thinking about things. And eventually you say, okay, I don't believe what I used to believe, I believe that. So now you kind of go into rejection mode almost. Now you're rejecting what you used to believe because you're still not strong enough in your new belief, and then there's the anger part. That's when the anger starts coming in. Because now you don't even want to think, or anyone brings this up, your anger about what you used to believe. And then eventually over time, you accept. Or you have all these loose ends that over time that you finally are able to resolve into your new belief or whatever it may be. And then there's acceptance. And now you can go back and you can talk more rationally to the believers or whatever without getting upset and not being confrontational. But a lot of people get stuck in the middle there with the anger. And that makes it tough on those people for a long time. I was there for a good while, and before I'm finally comfortable more with what I am now. Although, and
John, do you find that there are some things sometimes that can pop you right back into that anger phase? I'm like you. I got stuck there for a little while too, and I find that even though I have rationally deconstructed all of that, there are times, especially with our contemporary politics, that it can put me right back in there. I'm so angry at the people I loved and trusted that didn't do all this work. So I didn't have to do all this work, or makes me so angry that the tithing and the giving I did all that time to educate these people. You were supposed to go learn about this. You were supposed to go figure out, but wait a minute, this is not all it's cracked up to be. So there's things that can put me back into anger. Do you find that you ever do that? Do you ever go back to that place?
Certain little things come up now and then that it takes me back to the old days. But from my standpoint, and I've never come out with my family, but I have it safe because I'm 500 miles away or 400 miles away from them. So there's this separation of 2 states between me and them.
Right.
So I see him at Christmas. Okay, I'll sit there at Christmas. I'll bow my head. I'm in your house, right? So it's no problem. But I have probably 4 ministers in the family.
Ooh.
Or so. For my sister was a missionary in Argentina for 40 years. My niece married a minister out in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and so forth. And then, of course, whatever. I don't want to get into it, but so it's not even worth arguing with them. I mean, it's just accepted with them, and they're a couple of them are even arrogant about it. But that's a different story because they're so sure of what they are. So my other friends, I just don't talk about it, and you wouldn't know they're Christians either, just by the way they live and do and everything. So there's not a problem there. So I mainly avoid it. So until I come here and I can talk to you guys. And I guess the thing that set me off, and this was back in the 80s, that's when I started my transition, started looking around. I read an article in a paper, and this guy was talking. He was an atheist, and I'm not pushing my church now here, but he talked about the Unitarian Church. And he called it a halfway house for Christians. I said, that's what I need. And that's where I got my start. And fortunately, the one I went to here was basically a secular church. I mean, it was the founding minister was an atheist. Okay, wow. So it wasn't like they were a Unitarian church. They were a church, and they decided, well, Unitarians fit us closest.
Sure.
Okay, and that's where I went, and then of course the Humanists started up here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Gail, we have a question from someone whose a microphone is not working. It's Russell. Then we have a comment from AJ. But Russell's question is, do you feel it is important for more non-believers to come out so that people can see we are out there in good numbers and are good people? If you do feel this way, what words of encouragement would you give to nudge people to come out?
Oh my goodness, Russell, good question. I saw that you were here. I'm glad to see you. That's a great question. Personally, yes. It was so empowering for me. It was life-changing for me. I cannot imagine having the beliefs that I had and trying to stay underground for any longer time than I did. The short period of time that I did was it was traumatic for me. It was awful. It was a bad year. But my life is different than other people's. My children were lovely and supportive, and I did have at least something to start with. And I know a lot of folks, it's just terrifying. And I hear so many stories being recovering from religion about those experiences that I have come to accept that there's Ecclesiastes, the Bible was right about a couple of things. And in Ecclesiastes, when we read that there's a season for things, if you are dependent upon your parents for your college education, now's not the best time for you to come out. If they're religious and that's their threshold for you, my words to you, my words of encouragement to you are, this too shall pass. You won't always be dependent upon your parents, but it would be really important for you to get your education. And if you can do the bare minimum to keep them happy, maybe that's a little exploitative on my part, and I can deal with that. I can accept that. But I found my life was so much fuller when I came out, when I was able to, even with the hardships that I endured, even with having, when I left and my marriage fell apart, I reinvented myself. That's when I went to law school and said, I guess I'll be somebody else now. I guess I'll do this thing now, because I found myself at a crossroads, and not everybody's story has such a happy ending. So Russell, my answer is, oh my goodness. I wish I could embrace every person who asked that question and say, it's so much better out here when you can draw on reason and rationality to solve problems, when you don't have the superstition hanging over your head about burning in hell, when you can love your fellow human being because they're your fellow human being, not because they're one of God's chosen, or whatever it is that's in your mind about that. I want to tell them that. I know realistically that's not the story for everybody. So my position now is softened from that. Yes, come out, come out. It's do the best you can, make the best judgment that you can, seek the support that you can, get the resources that you can. And if you can, come out. And then on the other side of it, the rest of us need to be ready and prepared and willing and able to embrace folks whenever they do make that step. And that's one of the, that's the flip side. That's the joy of recovering from religion, is I get to see that. I've been the executive director. This is the end of my 6th year. And I've gotten to see folks on their trajectory, and some folks that have come in on the hard religious side, and they've worked and they've worked and they've worked, and then they come all the way around. And do you know that some of them have even come all the way around, that they're volunteers for recovering from religion? Makes me well up to even tell that story. But so I say to those folks, come out if you can. And to us on this side, I say, be ready and be prepared to support and to love and to encourage folks when they do.
I believe Russell was a volunteer, or has been a volunteer for recovery from religion, hasn't he?
I believe he has. And that's why I said I hate that your camera and your mic aren't working, Russell. I am glad to see you.
So, okay, and he says, what was? Then I had a comment from AJ. He goes, that many openly Muslim people seem to have won, but atheists get a better deal than Muslims do any day. Would you agree?
I certainly think that. I guess I'm biased, but I certainly think that. I think for me it has been darkness and light, the difference in my believing life and my post-believing life.
Anybody else have any questions?
I do. During your, it's the other John, during the campaign, were you questioned by any of the media about your belief or non-belief about abortion?
Oh, yeah, of course. It's rural Tennessee. It's the name of the game. It is the be all end all. We do not have an abortion clinic in the state of Tennessee. We don't have an abortion clinic in my district in the state of Tennessee. It's a moot point as far as my district is concerned. We don't have them, but it was still the number one question. You have to come up with a response, because they are going to ask that question. They are particularly going to ask that. They're going to ask that question if you're a Democrat. They're sure going to ask that question if you're me and you profess not to believe in, everything that they hold dear. So yes, you have to come up with that answer. John, that was a good question. I thought you were going to say, when you said, was I questioned by the media? I was questioned by the media all the time about my belief. I told you at the very beginning of my talk, because I was already an out atheist person, I knew I wasn't going to lie about it. I wasn't going to run from it, but I wasn't going to campaign on it. I mean, it was just it was incidental to who I am. It's who I am. If I had to do it all over again, and because we lost anyway, if you kind of go in knowing the odds are against you, I would have run harder on it. And I would have said, this is why I'm running. I am motivated because I believe this is the one life that we have evidence for, because I believe that my community's well-being, I'm part of that, and I have an obligation to that. And so I might encourage you to consider some way, if anybody is out and they want to run for office and they're asking about that, if you've almost already resigned yourself to the fact that I know my district, I know the statistics, I know the percentage in my district, but you've got a built-in platform when you run for state office, especially if you're, like me, you're a novelty, you're a, woman atheist activist in rural Tennessee running for state senate. Do it. You've got a platform. You've got the attention of everyone. If you want to be honest with your donors and you want to be honest with your volunteers, and if you already know that the odds are against you, that's okay. Do it anyway. The last slide in my talk was visibility is everything. I believe that the more we do that, the more we live these meaningful lives, and we show folks that you can be joyful. My blog is called Happy Healthy Heathen, and the more we show that and the more we can exhibit that, and I know that sounds a little bit like a Christian belief, but I believe that the more we show that, people have something to look at. People have something to go, well, you know, that lady, she seems relatively stable. She seems relatively happy. She seems, you know, to be able to live a life of joy and meaning and wonder and awe and all of the things that supposedly only religion allows you to do. So I think there's a place for it. If we can develop, I often said when I ran for office, the reason I did what I did was because I have a thick skin and a big mouth. And so if you can develop a thick enough skin to be able to tolerate that and know what they're coming after. And while it feels personal, it's because of everything that they've been indoctrinated with. And it's what the religion teaches us about non-believers. And if you can put that into a box and not let it tear you down, go for it. I just think it was a wonderful experience for me. And so I believe in coming out, and I believe in being who you are.
So Gail, you've only run the one time, is that correct?
I ran in 2016 and 2018. So two times, but it was the same office. It was state senate.
Okay.
One was in the regular cycle, one was a special election.
Okay, so I have you beat, but we'll talk about that some other time. I am curious along those lines, though, besides Gail and I, how many other people here have ever run for office? And if you have your camera turned off, just type a message into the chat box so we could take a count.
I believe I saw Stephanie waving. Anybody else? Are any more in the chat? Or?
Yeah, I'm an elected precinct committeeman.
Ah, Jack, good.
Okay, there's a lot of those, but and I do count that. But anybody run for anything else besides, you know, precinct committee person or up? Anybody else run? I think. Paul, you've been a PCP, haven't you? He's muted. I think Paul was also. Scott, I believe, was a precinct committee person at one time.
Yes, I have.
I'm Stephanie, and I ran for Illinois Senate, and I like to think that we began the move to turn to page blue.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. What year was that?
What year was that, Duncan? 2000. Was it that late? We can't remember.
Okay.
20 years ago.
And
20 years is good enough.
I started out by running for a state rep back in the 90s.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I had a comment or something for Gail along the politics line. It seems to me that after Trump and all, there's a good opportunity to drive a wedge between the Christian right and the Republican Party. After all, they are not trying to feed the poor. They're not trying to clothe the naked. Everything that Jesus told them to do, the Republican Party is not doing it. And more young people are leaving them just because their views against gays and lesbians and whatever, and blacks also. So it seems like they're primed to show, I won't say the error of their ways, but at least if their goal is taught in the Christian is to bring people into the flock, how can you bring people in the flock when you're shunning half of them away who are liberal?
John, we could talk all evening about this, and I feel
Okay.
strongly about it. Howard Dean said, I think it was yesterday or the day before, he tweeted about this something Republicans, and he said, and they certainly aren't Christian. And a lot of us in the secular world pushed back because they most certainly are Christian. First of all, they identify as Christian, and secondly, they're Christian by definition. You know, that's if they're doing a lot of the things that the Bible tells them to do. I think that this society, Christianity, has to come to terms with this. There's a tendency of moderate, progressive, hippie, feel-good Christians to say, well, they're doing it wrong. Well, I would venture to say that the Westboro Baptist Church people and all these hard right-wing people can find just as many verses backing up their behavior as the feel-good hippie Christian kind is. So I think that there is a reckoning. You called it I don't remember the word that you used, John. I call it a reckoning, that they are going to have to come to terms with Christian nationalism being the problem that it is not, there's no soft way around this. It is evangelicals who are leading this hard right movement of all of this restriction on women's rights and voting rights and all of the things that mean something to us so much. Christianity is leading the way, and whether it's not quite your version of it, it's still with the Bible out in front, of the parade. And so I see that coming. You talked about the opportunity to drive a wedge. I think they have to come to terms with this. It's either you're with us or you're against us mentality. For if you are going to be part under the umbrella of Christianity, you're part of this movement that's doing this, that's happening in our country. And so I don't think you can say, well, I'm not that kind of Christian. They may want to say that, they may think they can say that, but there is no, you have the same book, you're using the same book. And so you progressive Christians are empowering the book, which therefore empowers the people that are driving this fracture that we have in the country. So I see the opportunity too. And I think it is time for them to come to terms with that. It's tough. And I feel sorry for them. I've got friends who are progressive Christians and they're good people. And I'd like to partner with them to do some good things, but they do their part to legitimize and sustain the bad part of it. And there's no way to peacefully coexist. It's all a thing that's got to be reckoned with.
Right.
Actually, Gail, I'm going to disagree with you on one point, Gail. It is not one book as far as a lot of Christians are concerned, because you'll get the evangelicals who say that the Catholic Bible is not true. You get the Lutherans who will say everybody else's is wrong. There is no specific agreement. There's not even an agreement on what the wording is for the 10 Commandments among
which version, which of the three sets.
Thank you. That's my point. So when I was in college, I started a Buddhist student union. I was interested in Eastern philosophy back then, and I went to the Interfaith Council and actually heard all these Christian denominations going, well, your God says this, and they'll go, well, your God teaches this. And I'm sitting there with my friends from the Hindu, the Buddhist, and all the other groups, and we're looking at each other going, they're all Christians. What the hell are they talking about?
What's the difference? Right.
One of the problems I have right now, though, with the political aspect of Christianity, especially with Christian nationalism, is trying to fight the myth that this country was started as a Christian nation. And that seems to be very ingrained to a point where even when you try to point out to them the logical fallacy of that based on the writings of everybody who was involved with starting the nation and looking at the Constitution, you can't shake them from that myth, that belief system.
I agree. Andrew Seidl wrote a book. I hope everybody has read his view. If you are interested in politics, particularly current politics, and you read, it's called The Founding Myth by Andrew Seidl. He's the head of legal something at FFRF, which we get confused with this all the time. People confuse the two orgs, the Freedom from Religion Foundation. It talks, his whole point is that this Christian, and he's coming out with a new book coming up in November about how deadly Christian nationalism is and how that's, of all of the things, that would be the one highest indicator that someone would have voted for Trump in 2016 was whether or not they believed that this were Christian nationalists, whether they believe this country was founded on Christian principles. Fabulous book. I can't recommend it enough. The Founding Myth by Andrew Seidl.
Well, what it was just a quick statement is there's this myth that religion is going to make politics clean, which it's never going to be. But it's the opposite is happening. Politics is corrupting religion.
And vice versa. Mm-hmm.
Vice versa. Mm-hmm. And you look at countries where they've nationalized religion, those are becoming the less religious countries because it's forced upon people. Sure. Religion only has its power when it's voluntary.
Right, right. So if you want a theocracy, go look at Saudi Arabia.
Right. Well, even the Church of England, I've been told, no one they have the church and no one attends. And so I said my piece.
I heard you.
Yeah, the notion that the word of God is infallible and whatnot, it's so easy to poke holes in that, just to show how Christianity and the accepted dogma has changed over the past 100 years, much less 2000 years. The Catholic Church now technically, officially embraces the Big Bang Theory. They embrace the idea that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. Technically, they endorse evolution. This is the Catholic Church, and there are many different beliefs among many different Protestant factions too, but especially the evangelical folks, and some Catholics even don't know that the official position of their religion is more scientific and less crazy witchcraft than they think.
Part of the whole Reformation thing, the Catholic Church was in bed with all the kings. In fact, when they started our country, that was one of the big things, like, we don't want these two together.
Yeah. Yeah, and the welding of church and state. I don't know how many more examples we need on the world stage and in history that it's a terrible idea.
Well said, Scott.
Well, we seem to have kind of quieted down. There is one, let's see, I see one other question in chat. The two kinds of Christianity have to come to a reckoning. What would that look like? What do the progressives have to do? Not sure what the two kinds of Christianity are. Maybe that references something that you said earlier.
I think it's referencing when I talked about the progressive Christianity empowering the fundamentalist faction of Christianity. Okay. And the question about what do the progressives have to do, I guess I would flip that around. What do progressives, what do you think you have to do? Those of us who have lost confidence in the belief of religion, Christianity, look at Christianity as a lump. And I know that there's a spectrum, and I see it as a spectrum, but I think that the whole is responsible for the fracture that we have in our nation with politics. I think that Christianity is it feels like to me the majority of Christianity is driving some of these policies that are dividing our country, that are suppressing the right to vote, suppressing women's rights, rejecting LGBT, all of the things that they're doing. What I would say then, what do progressive Christians or the progressive faction of Christianity think that they should do? And so, to me, those of us on our side feel like it's an us, them. So my question is, I guess I would turn it around. What do you think that you have to do about that?
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been really extraordinary. Thank you so much for your time, your insights, your presentation about your experiences running for office. I think everybody had a delightful time tonight, and I hope that maybe you can come back after a while and give us an update on the state of the world as you.
Scott, thank you for the invitation. Howard, thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for coming and being in attendance, and for asking such good questions and being so engaged with me. It makes my talk a lot easier whenever I feel like you all are participating. And so I am so grateful. I would love to see you. I will be in Chicago for the Women of Color Conference the end of September, if anybody's attending that conference. But whenever we get back to whatever's normal, you can find me at all the major secular conferences. I table for Recovering from Religion and American Humanist and FFRF. Well, we don't table at FFRF, at American Atheist, secular students, all those things. So if you're ever in attendance at any of those, please, please, please come up and say hi.
Will do. Thank you all to all of our members and the guests who joined us tonight. Take care, and we hope to see you in another program soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Gail.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Gail.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
talk.
you.
Glad to see you today.
Good
Uh-huh,
night,
thank you.
everybody.
Night.
Really
Good night.
appreciate it.